Welcome to today's webcast, Transforming Finance for Tomorrow, sponsored by Workday and KPMG. I'm Jess Bazzo, and I'll be your moderator. Before we get started, I'll cover a few features of the console. On the left-hand side, you'll be able to view slides and polling questions during the webcast. We invite you to ask questions at any time during today's webcast in the Q&A area of your console. You'll also have the opportunity to earn a certificate for 1 CPE credit. To be eligible, you must respond to all 3 polling questions that we'll have throughout the webcast, as well as remain on the line for the duration of today's webcast. Afterwards, if you are eligible to receive credit, you'll be able to click on an icon to download the certificate located in the certification section. Now it's my pleasure to introduce today's opening speaker, Sanjay Sehgal, Principal Advisory Financial Management with KPMG. Sanjay is going to share some opening remarks to tee up today's panel discussion. Welcome, Sanjay. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Jess. Well, hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in a little bit about, I think, what's a really exciting topic around transforming the finance function. So just a 2-second background on me, as Jess described. I'm with KPMG. I've been in the finance function working with companies for the last 20 plus years, and I think you'll enjoy the theme of the dialogue today around what we're seeing in finance, because we think and we believe we're seeing a big change and opportunity in the finance function, probably bigger than we've seen in any of the last 20 years that I've been kind of working in this space. And so I'm excited about telling the story today. So Jess, if we could go to slide 2 real quick. We recently did a study, and we call it a view of disruption from the top. We really did a study with the CEOs, a number of Fortune 500 CEOs, and we're capturing some themes of what they were seeing in the marketplace. And what was interesting about this were a couple of things. I mean, I think you're going to see the word disrupt all over the place, but I think CEOs and others within the C-suite are starting to say that, rather than waiting to be disrupted by their competitors, we need to be doing the disruption ourselves, both within our organization, within the construct of the field that we focus in on. And so they had a lot of areas of focus. And so if you looked at, their strategic priorities, in the bottom right, they're trying to grapple with, the C functions. How do we get, quicker speed to the market, right? What do we need to do to leverage all the great data that we have, right, to leverage that data to help drive, if you look on the left side of this, more focus on analytics, et cetera. And so as we surveyed the CEOs, we found just these common themes, that we need to be thinking about disruption. We need to be thinking about how to leverage all the data and capabilities that we have, and what does digital mean for us as an organization. So if you flip to slide 3, all of you and each one of us are seeing a number of what I would call cross-sector business disruptors that are affecting us, right? It could be emerging technologies, whether it's the concept of the cloud or not. It could be new business models, right? We all personally have experienced the great business models of Uber and using an Alexa tool, et cetera. And so if you think about the changing workforce, even the geopolitical movements that we have, all of this is creating what I would say in our industries and companies that we're dealing with, a lot of what I would call disruption. And so what does that mean for finance? I think this is really what the crux of the presentation is going to be about today, but is we have the opportunity as finance professionals to kind of disrupt ourselves as an organization and think about how we would kind of move forward. Next slide.
Great, Sanjay. And this next one is actually our first polling question here, so I'll handle this for our attendees. This is our first polling question, as I mentioned. It asks, what do you see as the biggest disruptor of finance today and in the next few years? The answer options are emerging technologies and big data, evolving business models and platforms, shifting geopolitical and regulatory environment, or changing workforce demographics. We'll ask that you please take a few moments to select your answer. And for those attendees seeking credit for today's webcast, you'll need to answer all 3 polling questions. This is our first one. I'll leave this question up for a few more seconds to allow everyone to respond. Once we close this question down, I'll read out the most popular answer and turn things back over to Sanjay. So please go ahead and make your final selection here. And what I'll do now is share the results. The most popular answer, with just over 60%, is emerging technologies and big data. Sanjay, what I'll do now is turn things back over to you to continue on with your presentation.
Perfect. Well, if we go to the next slide, well, thanks for those results, and we're going to actually, it validates some of what you're going to see. So if I just ask you to bear with me for the next 10 minutes and just picture if we were having this conversation in 2 years, 3 years, or even 5 years, what would finance look like in the future? And there's a couple of themes that you'll see on the screen, and I'll talk to some of these that I think are relevant that might mean that. One is, increased support of innovation. So we have seen if a lot of the companies that we've been working with have started said innovation is going to be the way we kind of have a breakout. Our question and our hypothesis has been that we think finance should be sitting at the table in support of that innovation through looking at new ways to do capital allocation, new ways to support actually the evaluation of the right investment alternatives. And so we're definitely seeing a trend where finance is sitting more at the table with supporting the role of innovation. Going down a couple, employ 70% less labor. Now, I use that for we perhaps use that for a little bit of shock factor. But if you think about what's on the right side, robotics will eliminate shared services or robotics process automation. I'll talk a bit more about this, but if we believe, and we know this is happening, that in the finance function that robotic process automation will play a big role in the way we do some of our finance activities or financial activities, we definitely see that as happening already, and with that we definitely will see some level of less labor, more efficient labor. I mean, long term we'll see what do we need to outsource? Do we need to really send things over globally, or can we do this all within within our world here in the U.S.? Increased speed of insight. So we recently did, Brett and I recently did basically we leveraged Amazon's Alexa. So rather than printing out manual reports or even looking at perhaps even online looking at reports, we're at the point where we're starting to see where we could interface with an Alexa-like tool and survey our results. So we've proven it out where we can actually interface and say what was last month's sales, what was last quarter's earnings, or what are we seeing a trend at for the last X number of months, and within some quick way, some of those results will come back to us, and I think that's starting to show the power of where technology is taking us to interface with the data. Thinking about improving forecast accuracy, so leveraging artificial intelligence or the latest and greatest, what I would call emerging technologies. We all are sitting on data, right? So we all have all this great data, both internal data and even external data. And when we put all that data together, we think we have the opportunity, in fact, we know we have the opportunity to pull that in and try to start to make better predictors for the future. And so hence driving better and more increased accuracy in our forecast. So these are just some of what we would call the art of the possible on the right side. And what I'd say to you here is what's happening on the right side is this is happening. So all of these in some way, shape, or form are happening at companies as we speak right now. So it's not like this is totally futuristic. But that being said, every company will be embarking on it within their own time frame. Next slide, Jess. So if you said, okay, if you believe the story, then what is the CFO agenda for disruption? And so on this slide, I'm giving you a little bit of a high-level view of. We believe there's essentially 5 areas that finance needs to kind of play a big role as they go forward, and I'll talk through each one of these throughout this document. But one is leading strategy and capital allocation. The second is around extreme automation, insights and analysis, organizational simplification, and skills and talent. And so if we think about it, we're we're finance people and finance professionals, we need to have essentially a plan and a point of view on how we in finance are going to go from point A to point B around all five of these topical areas. And I will, if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about each one in a bit more detail. So the first one is kind of around CFO response to the business model disruption. And this is really around, if we want to think about how do we invest our capital? How do we look at, from a business perspective, we need to understand and scan the signals that are out in the business or out in the marketplace to understand where our business is headed. Then we in finance need to be sitting and working with strategy teams, working with the innovation teams to really think about how do we build the right portfolio to make the right bets for us. And so think about different ways to allocate our capital, thinking about more of an established framework, but have some way for us to be able to adjust throughout the year. Traditionally, we've always been stuck in a capital allocation process that had an annual bent to it. And what we're starting to see is we need to be more faster, more flexible in that way. And then the last 2 points I think on this slide is we think about how we support capital and strategy and allocation is we also need to have the right types of metrics to really evaluate our success of investment, because a lot of times we make investments or we make bets in a new business, et cetera, and do we really track kind of the value of where we're at? Next slide, Jess. So on extreme automation, this is kind of one of the ones that has really emerged quite a bit, and aligning with the questions I think that you all answered. If we were to step back, we KPMG firmly believe that we need to be thinking about from now going forward is how do we in finance automate as much as we can every component of every process that we could do to eliminate as much manual intervention or as hands-on activities that we have. And so when we think of the topical areas, right, it could be around data management. So how do we start to look at managing and integrating data across the organization, whether it be master data management, whether it be the data governance. So we need to be thinking about data because we've got so much of it, but putting it all together and managing it in a creative way is important. Blockchain is clearly a emerging technology. I think in some industries, financial services and some others, it's really starting to really take hold. But what is the role of blockchain for us in finance, and where will we see it play a role going forward? And I think there's some use cases that are starting to kind of pop up, but more and more we're starting to see this topic be thought about in certain key finance processes. The cloud, so migrating to the cloud ERP and cloud EPM. And so we are seeing a big push in the marketplace in how to actually leverage cloud-based technologies and cloud-based solutions. And for us, I think this is the important game-changing factor is I believe the next 5 years for sure, we are going to see a big push of updates to applications. I call them the modernization of applications. And so how does the cloud solutions play into our role of becoming better finance professionals and more efficient finance professionals? Robotics process automation, I mentioned a little bit, but we will see robotics play a bigger role in companies. Machine learning is another one, I think, on the other side that I'll mention a little bit more. And then the last point is around, digital analytics and delivery, how we actually deliver, our information. And so the theme of this slide is if we put a lens to this and come up with a strategy, how do we automate as best as we can and leverage all the tools, et cetera, that exist to get us to the more efficient state. Jess, next slide. So I think on, this slide, how is extreme automation being applied? I just wanted to give just, a little bit. And I think the one I'll just probably pick on is really this dynamic forecasting and analytical processes, right? So we're starting to really see that all this big data that we have, if we put this data together and bring it into our organization, leveraging our internal data, and we pick on like revenue forecasting, for example. we know that we can leverage the power of these technologies to create a forecast that if we back test it based on statistical tools and analysis, we believe that we could provide a 90% accurate forecast. Now, I'm not saying that this is, hey, finance doesn't have a role in doing the forecast, but if you think about it, a lot of us spend our time in pulling data, accumulating the data, creating these spreadsheets, or even whatever, bringing all the information together. So 70% of our time is spent on doing the buildup of the forecast and less on actually evaluating the validity of the forecast. And so we're seeing where this level of technology can help us now spend less time on the buildup, get a result, but then now really spend the time to kind of validate the depths of how accurate that forecast is. The next slide. Insights and analysis. Historically, we've always lived on what I would say the left side of this world around descriptive and diagnostic. And so our belief, and I think the challenge I give to everybody in finance is we'll always need descriptive and diagnostic information, but we need to automate that. We need to make that just happen. So whether it's getting to faster closes, I mean, I've heard a company say I'd like to get to daily closes, et cetera, but let's get all of our information anytime that we want, get it automated, get it delivered in the way we want it, whether it be through chatbots or through our iPads or ultimately even just printouts. But I think the shift needs to happen to more of what I would call the right side, which is around predictive and prescriptive. And so how do we focus a little bit more on the future and ultimately predicting where we should be going? And so if we can get our reporting and our insights and analysis more on the predictive side, ultimately then we can get to more prescriptive types of opportunities, and which would then say is taking all this big data and start to make some recommendations on how we're actually going to attack this, so and have some ideas given to us in a prescriptive way so that we can maybe react to it. And that's what's exciting, I think, about where insights and analysis is going. The next slide just shares with you a little bit of examples of some of these forecasts, these insights and analytics are happening, and I'll just leave that up for a second for you to quickly read because I think that then we'll get into the next topic. So if you get to the next topic, which is around organizational simplification, so when we tell the story, if we're developing a finance, if you remember the 5 boxes that I put about, right, we talked about capital allocation and us spending more in innovation. If we automate everything we can possibly do to get as efficient as we can start to focus on insights and analysis, which is great, and that helps us. We also need to be thinking about how do we simplify our organization structure. And I think this one is just important as we go forward with the role of robotics, process automation, right? We need to be thinking about it in these 4 terms. What work is done, where work gets done, right? So this geography no longer matters is our hypothesis, right? Because we believe in kind of this new model of robots, kind of finance professionals, et cetera. Who does the work? And then ultimately, how does the work get done? And so when you put all of these together, we definitely will be seeing a different operating model in finance going forward. And I think that's going to be the exciting time and the exciting opportunities for all of us to kind of figure that out together. Going to the next slide, if you think about the organizational changes, et cetera, that's going to mean that we in finance will need to look at emerging skills and what types of skill sets would we have. And again, we'll always have our core skills of what I think finance does best, which is the analytical horsepower, right? The accounting knowledge, the depths around that. But what we're starting to see and what we are seeing more so is as new folks come into the field is there are different types of skill sets that we're going to be looking at, right? They could be around the utilization of technology, right? And the ability to handle data around statistical trends and research capabilities. A little bit more in the behavioral side, right? So, how do we actually start to think more strategically and deal with ambiguity and white spaces, right? And so how do we put all that together? ultimately coupling it with what I would say is we're best at is our finance technical skills. And so, for me, the punchline I think on, this slide or in this part of the presentation is if we are seeing the world change for finance going forward, and you follow some of the ideas that I've talked about, we also will be dealing with, a whole new level of the way we have to get skills, finance folks trained, both from new entrants and even folks that are kind of currently in finance organizations to kind of deal with the new tools that we're dealing with. The next slide talks a little bit about the last piece of it is, as we look at, evolving this entire finance function, and as we look forward with the finance function completely changing, we're going to have to think about what do we do with talent management, because that's our most important aspect of it, right? And so if our finance talent and finance professionals are critical to the core of our organization in being successful, we realize that we're changing technologies and we're changing the way we do work. So what do we need to do? And so this gives you a little bit of an interesting picture about how you buy, build, borrow, and ultimately save. But ultimately, our prescription is around you build those relationships, right? Buy and build these relationships kind of at the university level. Start to look for the right skill sets and folks that we want to do as we've changed our finance operating model, right? We need to kind of shift the way we look at our resources and how we do that. If we need to look at a flexible workforce to bring in certain skill sets for certain periods of time, we need to kind of do that to enhance them for that versus actually hiring and then going down that path. And then the last piece ultimately is, as all of us have experienced, is how do we continue to keep our finance professionals excited and interested in kind of the current role that they are. And so saving these finance professionals through rotational programs, through training programs is very critical. Now, I'm flying kind of unfortunately through each one of these things, and I should probably mention that you could talk about a half day on each one of these, and talent being probably the most important. So I clearly didn't do it as much justice as I could in a longer session. But if you go to this last slide, where I'd like to kind of end for everybody is, what should you be thinking about most is, I think it's a couple of things, and I won't read all of these to you, is we are sitting, I think, at an interesting point in our as finance professionals right now as we look forward. And I do think we have an opportunity to step back and say, where do we want to be in 3 years? Where do we want to be in 5 years? Whatever your horizon is, but we need to develop a strategy where we want to be. We need to leverage some of the concepts and ideas that exist in the marketplace that are being leveraged, whether it's cloud, whether it's robotics, whether it's any of those other topics I mentioned, and start to kind of think about how we in our company will be able to start to kind of migrate that way with the right plan and the right way and do this deliberately. Because if we don't, we'll be kind of stuck in probably outdated processes and very slow to respond, because I'll tell you at the end, our business models are changing, and we know our customers and the world is changing so quickly. So we also in finance need to change as well that quickly. Jess?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for those opening remarks. I think super helpful for our attendees to have a baseline. What we're going to do now is transition to our second polling question before we get into today's panel discussion. So this one says, which of the following tops the agenda of your finance organization? The answer options are leading strategy and capital allocation, process automation, insights and analysis, organizational simplification, or talent acquisition and development. Again, we'll ask you to please take a few moments to select your answer. For those attendees seeking credit for today's webcast, you'll need to answer all 3 polling questions. This is our second one. We'll leave this question up for a few more seconds to allow everyone to vote. Then once we close this question down, I'll read out the most popular answer before we transition over to today's panel discussion. So again, please go ahead and select your final option here. What we'll do now is share the results. We can see the most popular answer with a little over 35% was process automation. What I'd like to do now is transition over to our panel discussion. I'm pleased to introduce Brett Benner, Managing Director, Advisory with KPMG, who will be moderating today's panel discussion. Brett's going to allow each panelist to introduce themselves before we dive into the discussion. Welcome, Brett. Over to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jess, and thanks, Sanjay, for the overview. I think it certainly is a very exciting and interesting time for the finance function, and with everything that's going on out there. And we have a great group of panelists pulled together, to really discuss how they're addressing and viewing all of the changes that are happening within the environment within their organization. Just really quickly, my name is Brett Benner. Like Sanjay, I'm part of our finance transformation team within management consulting at KPMG, focused on a lot of helping organizations with a lot of these topics that we were discussing. Before diving right into the panel, I'm going to turn it over and give the panelists a chance to give a brief intro. So why don't we start with Dominic?
Well, good morning and afternoon, wherever you may happen to be at this particular time. My name is Dominic Kellerman. I'm the Director of Financial Product Strategy at Workday. I started out many moons ago as a practitioner in the Office of Finance and Accounting, but for the past few years, I've actually been working with a number of different technologies specifically related to the application of finance and accounting. So good to be with all of you today.
Thank you, Dominic. Next, we have Elisa.
Hi, I'm Elisa Mosler, and I am the Vice President of Finance and Business Intelligence at Shaklee Corporation. Prior to this, I was the VP of Analytics at Sephora, and prior to that, the VP of Analytics at Wells Fargo. And so I think I have a lot of experience doing exactly what you're talking, combining the big data and all of the complex data analysis and modeling to form financial insights.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Next, we have John.
Hi, my name is John Andreessen. I'm the Assistant Controller at Brown & Brown, Inc., kind of handling dual roles in accounting and finance. Been here for about 17 years, and the interesting thing about working for Brown & Brown, where we are an insurance broker, about $1.8 billion in revenue, is we're a highly decentralized organization, which in the world of finance creates some challenges and opportunities.
Excellent. And last but not least, Mona Lisa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mona Lisa Chaudhry. I'm the Vice President of Finance and Accounting at Primerica, Inc. We're a financial services company headquartered in the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, and we distribute term life insurance and investment savings products to consumers throughout U.S. and Canada. We started in the 70s, but we used to be a wholly owned subsidiary of Citigroup. We did our IPO in 2010, and we've gone through major transformation initiatives, especially in the finance area since then, which I'll be happy to share with you all about.
Great. As soon as you can see, we have a diverse group of experiences and industries with us today, so it should be interesting to understand how each of you are handling, a lot of the changes that are coming that we discussed earlier. So I'm going to start with Dominic here, and really, I think just to start us off, why don't you give us an idea around, what your primary focus has been within finance, or what your priority is for your finance function.
Yeah, Brett, to put my response into proper perspective, really my insights are based upon conversations I have with finance and accounting executives really almost on a daily basis who are at a crossroads, so to speak, of evaluating the technology they use to help run their businesses. But based upon those conversations, I would categorize the priorities into three buckets that largely align with what Sanjay started the conversation with. And the first is dealing with the overwhelming avalanche of information that is bombarding the office of the CFO. Basically, data has supplanted oil as the world's most precious commodity. So the challenge is really not only managing it, but turning around and delivering it to a much broader constituency of decision makers who want it not at a month-end basis, but really need it on a daily basis. The second priority is transitioning from a role that used to be focused on closing the books and having controls in place to protect the business to now projecting value back into the business. I'm sure we probably all noticed that the last polling question we had really had nothing to do with debits and credits. The office of the CFO is now looked upon to be a strategic advisor on growth opportunities or identifying profitability pools and navigating through mergers and acquisitions. And rounding third, Brett, the last priority I'll talk about is dealing with the unprecedented pace and velocity of change. Whether it's trying to stay ahead of competition that might not even exist at this particular point in time, or anticipating evolving customer sentiment, or dealing with the shifting sands in the regulatory environment, change has never been harder to deal with. I'd say it's those three things.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are very well summarized. I think each of those are extremely important, and they present their own unique challenges within each of them. So building on those three, Elisa, do you see those as priorities within your organization, or do you have any others as well that you're focusing on?
Yes, I mean, for sure. It's the same. There is so much data. There is so much information. And what we've really been focused on is automation and becoming a more data-driven culture. And I think at Shackley, finance has definitely taken the reins on this. There used to be a lot of data, a lot of different metrics floating around the organization. And we really took the lead at spearheading, okay, these are our KPIs. These are the things that we are going to measure daily, weekly, monthly, make sure everybody's talking about the same thing, especially in a global business where every country was doing it differently. And we've been re-architecting our data into a global system that's going to allow us to automate most of our current accounting and financial reporting. So that was taking a ton of time. Spreadsheets were flying around the organization from all the different countries and then being aggregated together to form a global point of view. So we're automating all of that. We're socializing these KPIs and really holding the business accountable to achieve their KPI goals and to achieve an ROI. And just implementing a standardized approach for both reporting and also for forecasting. And so I think that's really what we've been focused on.
Yeah, that's another great point. It's with so much that can change out there, you really need to make sure you're measuring this appropriately so that you're not getting lost in the shuffle of trying to do too much at once. So I think it's great that you're essentially going down the path of automating and putting in the right technology, but you're also making sure that you're putting in the governance and management around that. So,
exactly, because it's measuring and then it's holding yourselves accountable to what you've done. Because it's very easy to say, oh, we're going to get this, and then you measure it back and you don't get that, but we want to continue to learn from our experiences.
Exactly, yeah. So, going forward with some of the work that you guys are actually doing, John, could you talk through some of the finance transformation initiatives that your team is trying to achieve right now? Maybe talk through some of the specifics around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say that we are in the middle of that transformation right now, knowing it's a multi-year process. But we kicked things off probably a couple of years ago and really looked at the people, process, and technology as it currently was, and said, well, what do we want to do? What do we want that to look like? And kind of what we discovered is that in a decentralized environment, we have hundreds of people doing accounting and finance, and, a great accountant isn't necessarily a great finance person, and the other way around. So we've been in the process of rationalizing that. We've definitely added some purely finance-focused individuals in the divisions and at the corporate level that have definitely made things better. And we looked at the process, kind of these hundreds of individuals, what consumes their time each day, with the goal of evaluating the manual processes and the time-consuming processes and the things that can be automated, and essentially automating those, which we've done a pretty good job over the last couple of years. And on the other side, it kind of goes hand in hand, the technology. We didn't have a lot of technology. I'd be kidding if we say we don't want to be best in class necessarily. We don't want to be at the top of the technology food chain. but we want to be on current technology and do what makes sense. So we did implement a common ledger and common reporting platform, and we're in the process of really picking a budgeting platform. So it's really focusing on those things. And, the sentiment of the KPIs, that was a really important one for us. They weren't exactly common. They are now, and there's a limited number of them, and everyone talks about them, and they're really important.
Yeah, and I think it's also a great point that you talked about. A lot of times, these are multi-year journeys here when you're talking about transforming, across your entire operating model, around the technology and the people and changing the organizational skill sets. There are a lot of quick wins that you can get to with automation, but when you start looking at it holistically, like you are, it can take time. And then again, that relates back to Elisa's point around the measurement and making sure that we're achieving, what we've set out to do. Mm-hmm. Mona Lisa, I'll turn to you and ask you the same question because I understand, your organization has gone through quite a bit of transformation as well. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the things you've done and where you are in the journey?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, it's not just a multi-year effort. It's actually a continuous effort to stay on track. So we started our journey about a couple of years ago, similar to John's team, and we used to have a very, very manual process-driven environment. It was a high-risk, high-stress environment. Everything was paper-based, spreadsheet-based, because we just separated from Citi after the IPO. We weren't a standalone company before that, so we didn't have all the reporting requirements, the control requirements that we had after the IPO. So we were operating in a very high-stress environment. It was high risk. It was like our systems were about 40 years old. Our data structure was about 20 years old, and our business model had changed a lot in the last 20 years or so. But we just in finance hadn't kept up with all the changes in that organization. So we were basically doing everything manually. We were doing our financials manually. We were doing all the reconciliations manually. So a couple of years ago, we finally got approval to undertake a complete transformation process. And we said, we can't, because we were so far behind, we can't do a little bit at a time. We have to take on a full project and touch on all the three things that John mentioned, people, process, technology, and in our case, we also touched data. We completely redesigned all of our processes. We implemented brand new technology, brand new ERP system, FP&A system, T&E, stock comp, SEC reporting, all to our finance. We completely restructured our teams. We brought in a lot of new team members because the job descriptions in the new world had completely changed because of the process redesign and the new technology. So we needed different type of skill sets, just like what Sanjay mentioned. So we staffed our team properly. And the other thing we did was data restructure. We changed our chart of accounts to disaggregate the data that's in our GL and go to more single-purpose chart fields to enable faster analytics. So now we've been live with that. We went live on time, on scope, under budget about 2 years ago. And since then, we've kept up with all the technological improvements. We upgraded. We changed technology where it's needed. We are automated. All the processes that we could automate, we've automated. Our data flows seamlessly between systems, between modules. We're completely paperless. As a department, we generate no paper. We utilize electronic workflow, electronic payments, financial gateway with the banks, and above all, what I feel like is the biggest achievement is the quality of life for our teams. I remember when I first joined the company, we used to work 24/7 just to close the books, just to do our reporting, our month-end quarterly reporting. But now, even at the peak time of the quarter, I can step out of my office at 5 o'clock and the entire floor is empty. And I can say that is a really good feeling, and there's nothing that can trump that.
Yeah, that's a great success story. and really does tie into what we're trying to say, especially around roles, right? It's the role of the finance professional is changing. Right? You want to be more data focused, right, rather than mining the data on your own or doing that manually by leveraging everything that you've done. So I think that's a great.
Yeah, right. You want your job to be more value added, right? So we had a lot of positions that was more of connecting data because our systems didn't talk to each other. So we had a lot of people who were just copying data over from system to system, doing reconciliations in spreadsheets. So we've taken all of that out of the equation, and now our people are more data driven, more insight driven, right? It's more analytics instead of data entry. So that it's been a huge change in the team and the type of work that they do.
Yeah, absolutely. And that dovetails nicely into our next topic here, because we're talking a lot about what you guys have been going through within your organization, but you also have to ensure that there's accountability for delivery of this transformation. And I think there are a lot of barriers that you're going to face across the organization, whether that be a change in culture, a change in the skill sets of the resources. So, Elisa, I was wondering if maybe you could touch on, some of the barriers that, you faced, on your transformation journey.
Yeah, sure. Well, first I want to applaud Mona Lisa's organization because it sounds like they are done. I mean, as she said, you continue to optimize on it, but we are definitely still in the throes of it. And so I look forward to being where she is. I would say, the biggest organizational changes that we've made at this point, so I'd say adding my position has been huge. So as I mentioned in the introduction, so prior to this, I was the Vice President of Analytics, and I reported into the CMO. Now I have many of the same responsibilities, but I report into the CFO. And I think it gives a lot more accountability. Since I don't sit in marketing, I'm more of this impartial third party. We all have the same objective, which is to increase our sales, but now I'm more kind of an auditor as opposed to in the day-to-day process. I think that creates its barriers as well because the marketing team likes to tell the story, and they don't like this third party presenting the data, which is just, the nuts and the bolts. This is what the data is showing. But I think for the company it's better because, our marketing team, they can tell a story. They can massage the data. And the big barrier has been that it's taken a lot longer to develop an effective partnership for them to really understand, look, I'm on your side. We're all trying to move the same direction. We're getting closer every day, I think. The other big organizational change that happened is actually the IT department also moved under our CFO. I think that was more kind of the state of where our company was at that time. But as a result, all of this automation and all of this data re-architecting has now, I think our CFO has played a much larger role in that and definitely designing where we need to get for the future.
Yeah, those are two great points. One, making sure that there's that, identified change agent that is really driving the transformation. And then two, making sure that, the finance IT partnership is fully integrated. And that can obviously, minimize some of the barriers that you face, which are, resources that are available from an IT and a business perspective, and then also addressing, the change component of it by having that sole person responsible. John, I guess I'd ask you the same question. What are some of the things you faced, within your company's journey?
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier, and this is a ramification of being in a decentralized environment, is just getting a handle on our teammates' skill sets as we're making these changes. And really kind of looking back at ourselves and saying, well, we're not doing a very good job at budgeting or forecasting. What's causing that? And ultimately, it just comes down to just wasn't in the skill set of certain individuals. And we came back and said, well, how could it be? I mean, these are primarily accountants. So what we did was we really ramped up training, and that actually went a long way. So it was really looking back at ourselves and saying, how can we make this a little bit better with the existing teammates that we have, and that was really just part of decentralization and not really knowing everyone that was involved on the finance side. Another big one for us, and it sounds silly, but it's transitioning from a paper environment to hopefully a digital environment. I'll tell you, we're not there yet, and really just getting buy-in to not produce the same printed reports or any printed reports on a monthly basis, and change how our executives consume the reports and analysis. And we're in the middle of that. It's gotten better, but a lot of the platforms, new reporting platforms, they're made to be consumed digitally, and generating printed reports and binders can actually take a lot of extra time, even though the reports look great on the screen. So those are just a couple. There's definitely plenty more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. I mean, there are a lot of challenges, when you're talking about change and transformation of this magnitude. I think it's been a theme that's sort of coming out in our discussion here is we need to make sure we're focused on the skill sets of the individuals here and making sure that they're changing along with all of the the technology and the data-driven changes that are happening as well. We have touched quite a bit on technology and how we're leveraging it, but I think, Dominic, this might be a good opportunity for you to give us your point of view around what you're seeing in the marketplace as far as how the finance function is evolving around leveraging the different technologies that are out there today.
Yeah, as a quick aside, though, Brett, what's interesting is I think if you asked this question a scant 10 years ago, I suspect some of our responses would have been on extolling the virtues of the cloud, a position or suggestion that would have been viewed as heresy, depending upon the thought, because various industry analysts you would have surveyed or consulted at that time, really the number of CFOs who were comfortable putting their financials in the cloud was in the single-digit percentages. But let's fast forward to today, and really the cloud and cloud-based technologies, and to be clear, personally for me, cloud means multi-tenancy for a variety of reasons, but the cloud provides organizations with the ability to move at the speed and complexity of their business and make the complex simple. And there's numerous examples, but one of the most current is having to cope with ASC 606 or 842 or the IFRS equivalents, as opposed to having to acquire modules or migrate patches through various environments. What providers can do is they can deliver capabilities in a way that not only supplies a path to compliance, but does so in a way that doesn't disrupt the business. But the cloud itself, while a fantastic economic delivery model, is really not enough to service the needs of today's office of the CFO. You have to leverage a whole new set of technologies that either didn't exist when traditional ERP providers built their solutions or were prohibitively expensive. One of my favorite statistics is that in the mid-'80s, a gigabyte of memory was $250,000. And today you could go to a conference and the trade show floor is littered with vendors giving away data sticks like Tic Tacs. So things like in-memory systems mean businesses can assess where they are at any time in a period versus what? Having to wait until month end to execute batch processes and move a bunch of data to BI architectures. And nowadays, depending upon the function, you start exploring deep learning algorithms and machine learning for areas like transaction matching and predictive or prescriptive suggestions, sort of like what Sanjay was talking about. And finally, the concept of things like distributed ledgers like blockchain are being explored for settlement or smart contracts in other areas of finance and supply chain. I think my last comment is really the adoption of these technologies will depend upon a number of factors, such as, for example, a vendor's ability to deliver them as an organic part of their platform. That goes back to my multi-tenancy comment earlier, and whether or not a business has internal domain expertise familiar enough to to help roll out these new capabilities? And finally, you have to ask, what's the appetite for adoption and trust in the outcomes? That's going to determine which technologies are adopted and when, Brett.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary, and you hit on a lot of key points there. Mona Lisa, as a follow-up to that, is there anything that you went through, specifically around leveraging technology, that you could share, or any, thoughts that you had around the technology aspect of your transformation?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, technology was one of the core of our transformation, and even today, it is at the core of all of our processes, all of our functions. We leverage technology in every single aspect of finance, from accounting to reporting to analysis, treasury, reinsurance, actuarial, you name it. We have a different technology for it. We do have a core ERP system, and we're not all the way in the cloud yet. We have some of our technologies in the cloud. Some of them are still in-house, which our core ERP system is still in-house, but we do have other cloud-based systems that link up to the ERP system. And because we're a financial services company, a traditional single ERP system does not really fit our business model. We do have to have all these other standalone systems, but our systems work very well with each other. From a user standpoint, it is pretty seamless. When it comes to technology, when we were going through our original transformation, we were focused on choosing the right technology. So not necessarily the best technology out there, not necessarily the most popular technology out there. We were focused on finding the right fit for our organization, for our needs. So first of all, you have to figure out what is your need, what is it that you're trying to do, and then figure out which technology fits that better. So technology was not the starting point. We wanted our new organization to look a certain way, to function in a certain way, and we figured out what's the technology that works best. I mean, technology it's all a tool, right? It is a tool to make your processes more efficient and effective, and it is only as good as your users. So having the right people in the right places and having the user buy in to make the most of your technology investments is the key to having a good or a successful transformation initiative or successful technology implementation. We try to make the best use of our technology. We try to do as low customization as possible, so that upgrades and maintenance are much easier. And we're not married to our technology. Because of the advances in the technology, they're so rapid moving. There's new functionality coming out every few months that you couldn't even imagine 6 months ago. So we try to keep up with it. If it's necessary, we move to a different technology. We have changed some of the technology that we implemented 2 years ago, and we moved to a different platform. So it's a continuous journey to keep up with the technology. And then the last thing I would say is that we brought in a lot of the technological ownership back into finance. We have a finance tech team that sits within finance, who's in charge of all of our finance technology and in charge of maintaining and upgrading and changing all of our finance technology and the data structure, which has worked very well for us.
Yeah, that's great. And I think there was another great point there, a broader point around, every organization is going to be different, right? All four of you have different organizations, different priorities, and different needs for your specific industry. So it's important to make sure you're looking at that holistically before just diving into one specific area of focusing on technology or focusing on a process. You want to take a broader view of it, right, and understand what your priorities are. I think we are getting close to the top of the hour, so I'd like to turn it over to either Elise or John. Do you have any final thoughts as a wrap up of where you see this going, or changing in order to keep pace with the business?
I would just briefly say we just keep putting the data out there, and slowly the KPIs, the ROI calculations, and accountability are becoming part of the norm. I'd say it's very easy to get derailed from the IT perspective because these are long-term 3-year plans, and day-to-day priorities keep shifting, and so just keeping laser focus on that and making sure it's top of mind. Everything's definitely taken longer than I would have liked, but every day we get closer to where we want to be, and so I think it's really just keeping it top of mind and making sure you stay focused on this is where we are, this is where we want to get to, and it'll happen.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. I just think now technology is at a place where things are a lot easier than they used to be in regard to getting the data and reporting on the data. And the finance teammates that we're looking for, it's kind of a prerequisite that you can crunch the numbers and things like that. But that's much faster than it used to be. So I definitely see things moving toward more of a people person in our finance folks, and that can have a business conversation with the leaders. And I've started to see it, and I think we'll see it more and more. Our finance people transitioning into business leaders and areas of the business outside of finance as they're able to get things faster and able to present it better. They're just in front of executive leadership a lot more than they ever were.
Yeah, well, I think we touched on a lot today. I want to thank all 4 of our panelists. I think you guys brought excellent perspectives. You've all made great progress in your transformation journeys, and hopefully it was insightful to everyone out there, because I think you guys hit on a number of key challenges and a lot of key points of emphasis when considering your transformation journey. So with that, I want to turn it over to Jess for our last question here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brett. I want to echo your thoughts and thank all of our panelists for their insights today, and also thank you, Brett, for doing a great job leading today's discussion. As Brett mentioned, what we're going to do now is transition to our third and final polling question of the day. This one says, is your organization leveraging the opportunities that disruption presents? The answer options are yes, we are actively harnessing disruption to transform our operating model. Somewhat, we are developing point solutions to continuously improve, or no, we have not yet begun using disruption to our advantage. Again, please take a few moments to select your answer. For those attendees seeking credit for today's webcast, you'll need to answer all 3 polling questions. This is our third and final question for the day. We'll leave this question up for a few more seconds to allow everyone to respond. Once we close this question down, I'll read out the most popular answer before we close out today's webcast. So please go ahead and make your final selection here. And what I'll do now is go ahead and share the results. Wow, overwhelmingly the most popular answer with about 65% is somewhat. We are developing point solutions to continuously improve. If you'd like to contact Sanjay or Brett regarding their insights to tee up today's panel discussion, you can see we've got some contact information for them here. So please do feel free to reach out. And again, we want to say thank you to all of our panelists for joining us today. So Brett, John, Elisa, Mona Lisa, Dominic, and also Sanjay for a great session today. And thanks for all of our attendees for joining us as well for Transforming Finance for Tomorrow. We hope that you enjoy the rest of your day and have a great week.